Hi everyone, so today you guys are going to be working on some DBQ practice. Specifically, you're going to be working on utilizing the documents to prove a specific point, kind of how to put those documents together, and how best to organize them so that you can follow through on one particular argument. So each group that you're going to be working with today, you're going to be facing a different thesis that you're going to be trying to prove using the various documents that you have available from Reconstruction. So you're going to be using both the documents that you had from the HyperDoc, which are still available on the class website, as well as you're going to be using several political cartoons today that are also going to help you make your point. This period has a ton of political cartoons. This is kind of the height of Thomas Nast's popularity as a political cartoonist, so we're going to see several of his. And what I would like for you guys to do with these is to use them as you would a document to elaborate onto an idea, to flesh out perspectives and flesh out some of those opinions of Reconstruction that we have talked about from various groups like Copperheads, like radical Republicans, like freedmen, etc. And so what we're going to be doing is, to start off, is that I'm going to actually go through just briefly some of these political cartoons simply because I'm not here today, so I would like for you guys to at least get an opportunity to get some of my insight onto it because I won't be able to walk around the class and give you insight one-on-one like I usually would. So our very first cartoon that we're going to be looking at is titled The Strong Government, the Weak Government. This was a political cartoon from Puck that was done by a cartoonist by the name of Wales. Just a couple of things I want to point out about this. Number one, this right here, that's Ulysses S. Grant. So he's going to be President of the United States between 1869 and 1877, as is shown right down here. And then this right here, that is Rutherford B. Hayes, who is going to be president from 1877 to 1881. Remember, he's the one that's going to get the position of the presidency through that compromise that was made with the South, where he would end military occupation of the South if he was given the presidency. And as you can see, that there are two very different opinions on these two presidents and their particular use of the presidential position during the period of Reconstruction. Here on the left-hand side, we have military Reconstruction as shown by our soldiers, where they are riding the backs of the Solid South in these carpet bags, as we know that those are people who are from the North traveling towards the South. And you can see him with all of his military equipment and how run down everything is in the background. Whereas on the right-hand side, with kind of this leave them alone policy, this policy of hands off by Rutherford B. Hayes, he's kind of burying that military Reconstruction that you can see kind of on the bottom there. And what you see in the background is all of this prosperity that has come from him taking his hands off of the South. Next, we have a political cartoon by Thomas Nast, and this is titled, This is a White Man's Government. At the bottom it says, we regard the Reconstruction Acts, so-called, of Congress as usurpation and unconstitutional, revolutionary, and void by the Democratic platforms, the Democratic Party's platform. The man on the right-hand side is Horatio Seymour, which is the man that was running against Ulysses S. Grant in the election of 1868. Then the man in the middle, you can tell, is a former soldier from the Confederate States with the belt buckle that he has, as well as the knife that you see in his hand that says the Lost Cause. The man that's on the left-hand side, he's wearing a hat that says the 5 points. And based on the ape-like way that he is drawn, it's clear that Thomas Nast is drawing him as an Irish immigrant, as Nast and many other cartoonists at the time did show Irish immigrants. Now, these three men are all standing atop right here a Union black soldier who has been trampled upon. And essentially what it's saying is that these three are going to use their power and use their votes as a way to defeat these newly freed black men. Next up is titled Out in the Cold. Now, this political cartoon is specifically about the 15th Amendment. Here you see that it says Poles and Chinamen are not admitted, they cannot vote. So that's specifically about the 15th Amendment, giving newly freed men the right to vote, but leaving white women, black women, really all women, as well as those of Asian descent without the opportunity to vote. And so here you see the white man in the background, you have a black man here, and then you have an Irish immigrant here that are kind of thumbing their nose at the woman who is dressed in the fashion of the upper middle class, and you see some things in her bag here that show that she is a suffragette. For example, something written by Susan B. Anthony. This political cartoon is one by Thomas Nast, and this one is about the carpetbaggers. It says, "The man with the carpet bags. The bag in front of him filled with others' faults he always sees. The one behind him filled with his own faults he never sees." So this is in relation to them coming down to the South to quote-unquote help the Southerners rebuild. They see themselves as coming down to the South to save them or to be rebuilders of the South. However, they are ignoring their own issues coming from their northern states, issues of corruption, issues of political bribery, issues of bigotry, etc., that they are just as at fault of some of these problems as Southerners would be themselves. And yet another Thomas Nast picture. So this one is titled, "We Accept the Situation." On the left-hand side, you have an African American who is holding a voting ballot. He has in his hand a Union cap, which shows that he was part of the Union military, despite the fact that he is dressed so kind of so shabbily. You can see the patches on his clothes and everything. But one of the military bills, this is before the 14th or the 15th Amendment would be passed, but this particular bill said that if you had served in the military, in the Union military during the war, regardless of your color, you would be given the right to vote because you had fought for your country, so you should be able to vote for your country. However, on the right-hand side, we see an ex-CSA member, and because of that same military bill, you would be disenfranchised because you fought for the enemy. You were a traitor to your country. This is a precursor to the 15th Amendment, and so as you can see, the ex-CSA is going to not be given a vote, whereas black men are given the opportunity to vote, and you can see the difference in their opinions just based on the looks on their faces. And lo and behold, another Thomas Nast painting. So this political cartoon is criticizing the dominant influence of the Peace Democrats, also known as the Copperheads, at the Democratic National Convention in 1864. So this is just before the war is going to end. This is about a year before the ending of the war. But what they're essentially showing is that at the Chicago Convention, so this is where the Democrats were having their convention decide who they were going to have as their political candidates, you can see here that they were willing to compromise with the South, that they were giving in to those Peace Democrats, they were giving in to those Copperheads by making this deal with the CSA. And that is at the expense of these Union soldiers who had lost their lives or lost their limbs in the war. And as you can see down here, at the displeasure, at the sorrow of Columbia, who, remember at this time, is kind of the symbol of America. She's kind of a symbol of American liberty and ideals. And so the fact that they are making this deal with the South as a way to end the war, Nast is trying to show that this is a very bad deal, that this is going to cause for the memory of the Union heroes who have died in a useless way, saying that if you are, as a political party, saying we will do whatever we need to end the war, you are essentially giving in to the South and essentially saying that all those men had died in vain. So this political cartoon is relatively simple, but there's a lot going on with it. So the first thing that we notice is that we have a donkey here. And the donkey, as we remember, is associated with the Democratic Party. We also see that there is KKK emblazoned on his side. Now, the KKK is made up of former Confederates in the South, and we do know that in the South, most people associate themselves with the Democratic Party. So it's kind of saying that the Democratic Party in the South is one in the same with the KKK. Now, we over then on the side have two people hanging from a tree. Now, this says a prospective scene in the city of Oaks, 4th of March, 1869. This is representing the fate in store for what were considered the quote-unquote great pests of the Southern society, the carpetbagger and the scalawag, if they were found in Dixie's land after the break of day on the 4th of March next. This was put out excuse me, in 1869. So here on the left-hand side is where we have our, on the right-hand side is where we have our carpetbagger. We can see that because of his carpet bag, labeled Ohio, and then on the right-hand side is the scalawag, the Southerner who supports Reconstruction. And as we can already tell just from the very simplicity of this political cartoon, it shows that if you are one of these two people, if you are in the area of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, by March 4th, 1869, then you are going to be subject to the punishment of the KKK, of the Democratic Party. We will run you out of town either politically or we will deal with you in the methods of the KKK. Next, back to some Thomas Nast. This is titled Colored Rule in a Reconstructed State. Underneath it, it says, the members call each other thieves, liars, rascals, and cowards. Columbia, who is in the background here, under the sign that says, let us have peace, says, you are aping the lowest whites. If you disgrace your race in this way, you had better take back seats. So this is supposedly a scene in South Carolina. And the reason it was South Carolina is because that was the state that during the period of Reconstruction had the largest number of African Americans in their state legislature. And that was because, if you recall, the rule of Reconstruction was that if you were a ranking member of the Confederacy, you were now disenfranchised. You were not allowed to vote or hold office again. Well, that was the majority in South Carolina, so the only ones that were available to hold office were African Americans. But despite the fact that usually Thomas Nast shows African Americans in a relatively positive light, or at least is sympathetic to their plight as newly freedmen, here he's kind of playing into the ideals of the time, that there was a lot of, there was a lot of fighting, that there was a lot of corruption, and that these poor white men that were actually in office were being overrun by these apish black legislators, and that nothing was being done and that corruption was rampant. This was actually no worse than the corruption that had existed before the war, and in many historians' beliefs, it actually was probably a lot less than what had existed prior to the war. Now, our final image is not actually a political cartoon. It's actually an advertisement that was taken out in a newspaper all about the Freedmen's Bureau, and very much against the Freedmen's Bureau, saying that it was created to help keep the Negro in idleness at the expense of the white man. You can see that not just by the lazy kind of demeanor of the African American man here, but also by other statements throughout the image, that the white man must work to keep his children and pay his taxes. Here that it says the Freedmen's Bureau, Negro Estimate of Freedom, that they have the freedom of no worry, that they have the freedom to eat and lay back and consume gin and do all kinds of things that basically doesn't require them to do any kind of work. This was, for the most part, illustrating not just Southern fears, but rather that this was actually from taxpayers of Pennsylvania. So this is actually from the North. This is showing kind of a waning support of Reconstruction ideals by people in the North, because they were feeling like They were paying for these newly freed men, and they weren't really getting anything out of it. That although they might have disagreed with slavery, they do not agree that African Americans are equal to whites. We also see that they are fearful more of economic issues rather than the societal issues that come from freeing the slaves. So, this is what you guys are going to be doing today. First off, you guys are going to be separated into 6 different groups. There are 3 group sets, which means that you and another team are going to have the exact same prompt for this assignment. So you guys are going to eventually be working together as one very large team towards the end of this assignment. Now, each of these groupings are going to be given a thesis, and you're going to be using a minimum of 4 different documents to support the thesis that you've been given. Now, these documents are not just the political cartoons that we've gone over, but rather it's also the 5 primary source documents from Reconstruction that we used during our hyperdocs. So that's the 4 documents plus the Walt Whitman poem. So you can use any of those documents in order to prove your point. So you have way more documents than you would ever have on an actual DBQ. So there should be no reason why you feel like you're struggling to find information. Now, 3 of the documents that you're going to select are going to be used to help prove your thesis. Remember that you are serving almost as a detective, that as a historian, you were not there when these events happened. So you have to utilize primary sources as your evidence to prove what you think really went down. You cannot use just generalized statements. You cannot use just historical context from the time. You have to use actual evidence to prove your point. Now, the 4th document is going to be one that is used to either corroborate, contradict, or qualify your argument. So you are going to be finding a document that either supports the argument that you've already made. Now, you've already used 3 documents that support your argument. So what is this 4th one doing? This one is specifically trying to prove the point that you've already made. So there needs to be something in that document that really just helps prove that everything else you've already said is true. Kind of same thing, but opposite with contradiction. That particular document should be something that shows this is disproving everything else. That I've said that this is the way things are, but obviously there's an opposite perspective. The other one is qualification. Qualification is showing that while things are usually one way, there could be kind of an exception to the rule. And so you're looking for these documents that will help prove, or elements within the document that helps prove your point and helps give validity to what you have said. You guys are going to be working on this in an outline, and you're going to get that outline in just a couple of moments. You're going to fill out your information using your documents, which you can find on the class website. And then after that, you are going to get together with your matching group. So you guys can have about 30 minutes to work by yourselves in kind of your smaller group before you meet up with your larger group. And with your larger group, you guys are going to share your outlines. You're going to kind of peer edit each other's work. You are then, once you guys kind of feel like you have really selected what are your best arguments, what are the best statements that you picked out from each other's documents, you're going to get a piece of paper from the sub, and it's going to be one of those large white pieces of paper, and on that you're going to create the final draft of that particular outline. You don't have to write it in sentence format, it's still just an outline. But this should be large enough written out that the rest of the class should be able to see it, because we are going to be talking about them next class. We're going to go over the outlines. We're going to see where information is really well supported and where information is still not quite being connected back to the arguments. So we're going to be going over those next class, but you're going to have roughly about 20-30 minutes to work together with your large group to peer edit and to create your final draft. So please make sure that you are working together as a large group. I know that some of your groups might have, 12 to 14 people in them, and that can be very difficult to have a lot of people working at the same time on the same thing. feel free to divvy up the work. Make sure that maybe a couple of people are working on what should be the first document, a few people should be working on what should be the second, and so forth. Make sure that everybody is participating, and this is because this is for everybody's benefit. If anybody's sitting back and relaxing and checking out what's on Instagram, you're doing yourself a disservice and not preparing yourself for your DBQ, which will be coming up next week as part of your final exam. So please make sure that you are utilizing this practice time effectively. Finally, when you and your team are all finished with that outline, as that kind of that large team outline, you're going to turn it into the sub along with the individual small group outlines, and then you are going to have the remainder of the class period to work on your digital review projects. So you have your final digital review project individual due on Friday, and then your group one will be due the following week. For those of you guys who have still not been hitting publish every time that you have been updating, I have been marking out whose stuff I do and do not have. So please make sure that you are hitting publish after every time that you have updated your website so that I can make sure that I see it. Aside from that, I hope you guys are having a great day, and I will see you soon.